moving forward, using all my breath, making love to you was never second best. I saw the world thrashing all around your face, never really knowing it was always mesh and lace. Sometimes you can't see that all you need is moving. And if that's right, you stay tonight. But it can take some time. And it's not here tonight. Something you can't get what you want. Till you know what you want. So you can't get what you want. Till you know what you want.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Whiskey Wednesday show. Jack just came in for a little appearance. How you doing, buddy? It is Wednesday night. I imagine, I can't remember what date it is because we are pre-recording this and it's now early March and this is happening sometime later. But we have a very special guest on the show tonight. He's a musician. He's a wordsmith and an advertising guy. He's one of my oldest school friends going back to high school and probably even before. Did you go to did you go to McDonald Drive? You did.
Yeah, we were in junior high together.
We were in junior high together. Wow.
Yeah.
So that's going back a long time. And his name is Brian Sheppard. And Brian is talking to us today from St. John's, Newfoundland. And we were just talking about how comforting it is to be home. And you were saying that it's like slipping into an old sock in the best possible way, I think is what you said.
Maybe not the best. Everybody in Newfoundland's be like, you're calling the province a sock? No, it's real. I was just saying that it's just nice to kind of get back to a place. If you grew up here, and maybe it's the same everywhere, but I do think there's an extra kind of thing if you're from an island. You know, I've spent a lot of years away, and we've just moved back recently. Just reconnecting with people. It's shocking how much you just pick up after. I've bumped into people I haven't seen in 20 years, and they're like, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" And it's like you saw them last week at the grocery store. And maybe that happens everywhere, but I've been kind of startled at how that familiarity comes back so quickly, you know, which is cool.
I think that is a Newfoundland thing. You know, I remember when I moved to Newfoundland, or when I moved away from Newfoundland, we did it at the same time. Actually, we shared our first apartments together.
That's right. That's right. Back in 1989, Ken.
Is that what it was? 89?
89.
798 Dundas Street West, above the Dory hairdresser.
Can I tell you a story about that before we move on?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
My sister Lori came to visit us. Lori's 3 years older than me. And so she came to visit us. And I was the first member of my family to move away to Ontario. Like everybody else stayed. And, you know, we were living, it was a rough spot. You know, it was a great being downtown, but it wasn't the greatest of apartments.
Right.
And she pulled me aside as she was leaving. And she said, "Don't ever let mom and dad come and visit you here." And I remember it was I think we each paid $260 a month, including utilities or something like that. You know?
Yeah, and I think that there was you had the back room.
Yep.
We had the middle room, and Janet Kiersey was downstairs.
That's right. That's right.
But we also had like people living in the laundry room for, you know, weeks at a time, and people living on the couch in the front room for weeks at a time. There was no shortage of newfies coming and going into that place.
No, it was a real education because living downtown, it was wonderful, you know. And as you know, Toronto's changed a lot, but the interesting thing about that neighborhood then, it was in a transition. It used to be the Portuguese part of town,
Yeah.
And it was becoming more of there's a lot of Vietnamese families moving in, Filipino families. Those shops were changing and stuff. So I don't know. I really, really loved living down there. That was super cool.
It was pretty great. You could go down to the Portuguese shops and get like a nice bun for 25 cents. And then for lunch or for dinner, you could treat yourself to some $5 vermicelli dishes, and they were the best. I mean, it was
amazing.
Yeah, it was so good.
Perpetually broke, but great times.
Yes. And there was a hospital nearby, which I seem to remember we needed at one point. Didn't you cut your hand?
Yeah, we were walking. It's funny. I still got the scar. We were walking up the road, and one of us dropped the bottle, and we were taking the bottle like to throw it in the garbage. We we're just leaving it, and we're walking along, and I somehow slashed my hand. And I can remember going over to there because I needed a stitch.
Yeah.
And this was back in people talk about, the healthcare system's deteriorating. No, it was shitty 30 years ago too. And I can remember I'm in the waiting room. I think you were with me. I'm in the waiting room, and the nurse comes over, and there's like 50 people in the waiting room. And she said, listen, you're not going to see a doctor for like hours, but you need a stitch. How about I just stitch you up right here? And she kind of took out some lidocaine, took out some and sewed me up there in the waiting room. Right.
Wow.
So this whole the whole thing about everything's terrible now. No, it's always been like,
there's just more of us to complain now.
So it's funny though.
Those were great times. Those were really fun. I remember that. I mean, coming from Newfoundland, we didn't have much multiculturalism back home.
No. And
to be dumped in the middle of little Portugal and little was it mostly Korean at that time? No.
I think it was mostly Vietnamese.
Yeah, it was Vietnamese. You're right.
Area, right. And of course, we were right on the edge of Chinatown.
Yeah.
And I was going to art school, so I had to walk through Chinatown every day, which was amazing. Like,
incredible.
We sort of talk about, culture being something that's existed for a really long time and everything else. But there was this kind of shifting. The cultures were shifting all the time up there. Yeah. And you could almost see it every couple of years, like there'd be a new group of folks who'd move into an area, and it just became amazing. So it was cool to be part of all of that.
So we grew up a little bit. Then we went off and became very, very successful in your field of advertising. I mean, it's your accolades. Look it up, Brian Sheppard. You'll find it all over Wikipedia and LinkedIn. You were a master of your craft. Now you're back home in Newfoundland, and it could be perceived as midlife crisis time. So you have the red car, you have the young girlfriend, or you start up your 80's high school university cover band.
I always joke that I had my midlife crisis when I was 14, I think people tend to be old souls from out here. No, you know what? I don't know if I don't look at it that way. But definitely, I don't know if it's because of the age that we're at or because of what we went through with COVID and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sparked across the entire population a little bit more introspection and kind of where we are and everything else. I think for me, what it caused me to do was just look up from everything for a minute and go, you've been doing this for 30 years. And I was lucky enough that I was so lucky. I've just had nothing but great agencies that I've worked with. Like it's really interesting, Ken, because I was back when I had told a few people, Kim and I had told some of our close friends that we were planning on moving back. So maybe this was end of 2022, early in 2023. And of course, one of my closest, dearest friends is Glenn Collins, who's an amazing guitar player and just one of the greatest guys, just a great guy. And Glenn and I played in a band back in the 80's, and Glenn is, he's been living in Newfoundland for a long time, and he's one of those guitarists that if a show comes through town and they need somebody to kind of jump into the pit and play, he's so versatile. He's a great player. But we were talking, and he said, "Hey, do you want to, get together and do some playing?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And then I was having a conversation with my friend Bruce Cooper, who I've known for years.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce is a great drummer, and he had been away as well. He had recently moved back to Newfoundland. He said, "Hey, maybe we could get together and so anyway, we kind of just, the three of us started playing together. And then Peter Collins joined us as well. And Peter, great bass player, great vocalist.
Unbelievable.
Who Glenn and I used to play with in a band years ago. And and so we're just rehearsing, and it was Glenn who said this, which I love. He said, if we're going to do this, let's not get stupid about it, but let's take it seriously. Let's get together every week.
Mm-hmm.
Pick off a song. Now, these guys, they've been playing for years. Like, all three of them have stayed in tune with their instruments. I haven't. And so the learning curve for me was steep. But the great thing about the kind of music that we're playing is it's not like I'm playing, Rachmaninoff, stuff. It's much more of, the great thing about 80s music to me is obviously you want the music to be right, but there's a certain feel to it. And a lot of that is keyboards and synthesizers and stuff. So it's trying, just finding my way to kind of merge in with these guys as we break down these songs. And it has been the most fun, Ken. It has been just a screaming good time.
So in the 80s, the band was Parental Guidance, and it was you and Peter, Glenn,
and Eric Bailey.
And my sister played keyboards.
That's right, Paula. That's right. Paula played with us as well. Yeah.
So there was, and then you had Steve and Tommy doing lights and sound. Is that who it was?
Steve Ryan was our sound guy at Freddy's, which was amazing. And Tommy Dunphy did lights for us. Jeff Seymour used to come and do lights for us as well.
Yeah.
And you were on the road with us. Yeah, you were on the road with us a bunch of times as well. What was really interesting about that time was that, and I never realized how lucky I was. When I started playing with those guys, I think I was 16.
Yep.
And I met Glenn through another band, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come down and rehearse? We've got this band. We rehearsed the Cornerstone, and the Cornerstone was this incredible club in St. John's. Like it was a dance bar, but it had a stage and it had real sound and real lights and all those kinds of things.
With fog machines and everything.
All that. And I'm like, you guys rehearsed there?" And so I met these guys, and same thing. I'm three great players, and I'm like, I just happen to be the kid with a synthesizer. And but we started playing together, and it kind of came together. We had another keyboardist for a while, a guy named Skip Michelson, who was an older guy. He was in his 30s at the time, but he was a great player. I learned a ton from him. But what was so nice about being connected with Steve and the guys at Freddy's were, and Steve said, "This is a business for me. You guys, like, we're going to be out playing shows a couple of times a month." They would rent us the PA systems, rent us the lighting rigs. But, it was kind of nice to have some adults around looking after you when you're going out, to Marystown to play a show or wherever. And that was a great few years. We had a ton of fun, played a ton of shows. And what's interesting for me now is when we were doing that, we were the same thing, 80s cover band, right? But it was the 80s, so we were just a cover band. Is you're playing music off the radio and stuff that you hear and stuff that you like, and it's current.
Yeah.
the thing that's so interesting now, Ken, is that when we're choosing songs, we're kind of reintroducing them in a weird way. Like, obviously there's songs that everybody hears, but when you pick out a weird Echo and the Bunnymen track or a weird XTC track and you start playing, like, oh God, I haven't heard that in years.
Yeah.
And we played our first show a few weeks ago and it was phenomenal, amazing show. And that's one of the things that I heard from so many people after the show. It's like, oh, I can't believe you played Do It Clean. I can't believe you played Generals and Majors or whatever. And I think that that's kind of the thing that's interesting now is back in the old days, people would come because they just wanted to hear the music that was on the radio because there was so little live music in Newfoundland at the time, aside from local bands. But now I think part of the thing is almost curating music from that era in an interesting way and letting there be a moment, like when you're playing a show for 3 hours, that's what you're going to get. You're going to come here and you're going to hear this.
Yeah.
And if you're down with that, come and get totally into it. If you're not, there's something else for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that's excited all of us as we've been doing this, is rediscovering it. And I had no idea how that first show would go. It was great. I didn't know what the reaction would be. There's a lot of folks who still really love this music. And we're not trying to do it like a nostalgia oldies thing at all. It's just, here it is,
Yeah. Great 80s band is the weirdest and most fabulous thing to discover. When we were down in Seattle in 95 or 96, we were there for 2 months while we were recording a record. And I found this club on Tuesday nights. I can't remember the name of the band, but on Tuesday nights they had an 80s band. And it was all the repertoire that you guys did, back in the parental guidance days. And I ended off stumbling in there one night and the room is jammed. It's just jammed and everybody's having a great time listening to 80s music. And, and they had, the G707 guitars out, the synth guitars, the whole thing. It was just like, This was, and that was in 96. And I have yet to see that again anywhere else that well done. Yeah. The great bands out there like Dwayne Gretzky and stuff that are doing amazing covers and they do a few from the 80s, but they're doing, just all the hits worldwide and over the years. But to be focused on that time and place was really cool. So I was really excited to hear that you guys were doing this again. And is the repertoire much the same?
No, and Bruce, he played in a great band called the Dervishes, which were one of the first kind of, bands in Newfoundland that did outside the punk scene.
Yeah.
That did kind of alternative music. So between the four of us, we've covered a lot of songs over the years. There are probably a half dozen songs that we've all played, in our various bands, but most of it is kind of digging back and going, okay, we would never have tried to play this 30 years ago. But what if we tried that? And like a song like Cry by Godley and Creme, like I've never heard that covered in live. Certainly there have been bands that have done it, there have been recordings of it, but it's technically a hard song. It's a weird song to play, but it's also a real pleasure to kind of break that down and sort of get inside of it. And I think that's one of the things we're finding too is, I find this, I can't speak for the rest of the guys. I'll be sitting down, breaking down parts and hearing things that I've never heard before. I've heard these songs 1,000 times, but then you'll hear this, oh, that's what's going on in the weird background of that. So I don't want to make it all intellectual, but there's a bit of that exercise as well. And, that's a personal thing. I just love this music so much that if I can start seeing other sides of it, all the better.
Yes.
But yeah, no, repertoire wise, we're trying to keep it, we want people dancing and having a great time, but we also don't want it to be, it's not all top 40, so there's some Smith songs, there's Joe Jackson, there's, a wide variety of what I would call kind of the cooler artists of the 80s, and which has been fantastic.
You're still doing the Blue Peter tune?
No, we talked about it.
Oh, no.
No, we talked about it. And we used to play that a ton. And it's just one of those ones for me. It's like, and I love that band. Like they are incredible band.
It was a big hit, though. Yeah, it was a big hit, though. It's a bit of
and I'm not afraid of that so much as it was just played it so many times. Like I think we ended every show with that, back in the day. And so I think it's kind of let that one kind of be where it was. I had a funny, we were talking about that song, and I'd never seen the video for it, and I'd never heard it on the radio. But back in 1984, when the Police, when Synchronicity came out, great Police album, they played a show at Le Spectrum in Montreal, and Blue Peter opened for them, and it was hosted on First Choice Super Channel, like on the pay TV channel. So I remember my sister was a huge Police fan, so we watched it, and I recorded it, and I'd never heard of this band before, but I can remember having that tape and listening to it. And a couple of years later, when I got into a band, going, "Hey, what about this?" And we played a few songs by those guys. They were a great band. They were just a great.
Yeah. Spoons? Doing any spoons?
No spoons. No spoons. I know. We're gonna have to.
I'm looking for Canadian content here.
Well, it's hard. I tell you, I think again, part of the thing that we're trying to do is kind of just find out what's new for us as well. Like there's some songs that we just, obviously that we've done in the past, but part of it is, and what we actually did, which was great. You're going through, you're trying to build up 30 or 35 songs, right? Because you want to have 3 hours of music. And earlier the year, what we did was, you sit around in your band meetings, you go, what about this? What about this? Oh, I'd love to do that. Sure. And what we did was we said, okay, let's do a thing where each of us names 3 songs and there's no veto. We just got to pick 3 songs you're passionate about. Let's go do them. And that was a ton of fun because there's no, well, I don't really want to do that. Nope, that's not the deal. And some, actually, we didn't do all of them, but some really great songs came out of that too, because again, you've kind of got your own pet sounds and idiosyncratic things you've always wanted to do, but you could never get another band to do with you. Right. So, but
that's very cool. And it's good to acknowledge, the fact that Parental Guidance had and Parental Guidance was an 80s band, but this isn't Parental Guidance Part 2.
No way.
Different 80s band, and you're doing different 80s tunes, and you're doing it from a different place in life, which is really cool.
100%. And that's kind of, that was its own thing at that time.
Right.
And it was, again, it was reflective of what was happening then. We were just trying to be like what was on the radio that you could never see live. So that was one sort of thing. Whereas I think this is, and I loved that. It was an amazing time. I think we're just, this time around, we're like, okay, what can we bring people that they maybe haven't experienced in a long time?
Right.
And I, again, playing some of those songs live, and you roll from one song to the next, and there's people on the dance floor, and you start in a song and they're like, oh my God, I have not heard that since 1986.
Yeah.
And which is cool. And
that's fantastic.
And that's sort of the trick. And it, as time goes on, as you keep, there'll be some songs that will retire and we'll bring some new ones forward. That's going to be the kind of ongoing trick about how do you find stuff that is accessible, but it's just off kilter enough. People go, who was that again? And that's sort of the thing we're trying to do. That's
pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I did have some sort of ideas I was going to throw you in case you hadn't considered stuff.
Hit me.
Anything from this album?
That's Look Sharp, right?
Yeah.
What are the singles off of that?
Oh, it's got every time. One More Time, Sunday
More
Papers.
Time.
Is she really going out with him?
We
Happy
do we do Sunday Papers.
You do Sunday Papers?
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah.
And,
Great album.
have you ever seen him live?
No, I've seen some footage of him live, but I've never seen him live.
Kim and I saw him at Massey Hall. Oh God, almost 20 years. Oh, maybe over 20 years ago. He was doing a anniversary tour of the Night and Day album.
Yeah.
And he had most of the original band from those sessions out with him. And he was incredible. And I've always admired him because he's a great singer. He's an incredible keyboardist.
Yep.
He's a great songwriter. He's just a great songwriter.
He is.
And he moved around. Like that album is very different than Night and Day. And
oh yeah.
Right. Night and Day is completely different than Body and Soul.
Yeah.
So or
good.
I'm the Man. Right.
He is constantly in evolution.
Yeah. And he's still recording too. So, which is amazing, but I'd like to do One More Time. Like One More Time to me is the classic, that's the classic encore song, right?
It's a perfect 80s bar song. It's just like everybody's drunk at the end of the night. It's something you can sing along with. It's fast. It's catchy. Everybody kind of knows it, but they're not sick of it. It is.
Right.
You're right.
We've sort of had some conversations too about what 80s music is, because I think if you didn't grow up in that era, if you don't look at it, it's kind of all one thing. It's all like, it's going to all be, Culture Club or et cetera. But, there's new wave, but the beginnings of grunge were beginning to happen at the end of the 80s. You had the Manchester, you had the Happy Mondays and the Stone Roses at the end of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
The beginning of the 80s, like that's not new. Joe Jackson's not new wave. He's kind of post-punk.
Yeah, it's like late 70s, I think even.
Yeah, so we play some Cars songs.
Yeah, 79.
Yeah, the two best Cars records were the first two. They came out in like 78 and 79. So that's the other thing too, is it's hard. You got to be careful not to kind of define it as new wave or et cetera. We just call it, it's just great music from that decade.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty.
What else you got there?
Okay, let's try this one.
So good. So that's probably my favorite Cure album.
It's my favorite too. Yeah.
Right. And we do some Cure songs. I don't think we do anything off that. So many good songs on that.
I know.
On that album.
But the whole record from start to finish is just a perfect mix.
Yeah. Many years ago, we used to do Close to Me.
Yeah.
And is In Between Days is on that as well, right?
In Between Days, yeah. Close to Me. Other than that, like there's no other big singles on it. 6 Different Ways and Screw and stuff like that. They're kind of B-side songs, anyways.
Yeah, I think you got to be a bit of a fan. But God, how we wore that album, wore that record out.
Yeah, that's not my first copy of that one.
Good.
Okay, how about this one?
Bad Habits. Yeah. So there's 2 Monks albums.
Yeah.
There's Bad Habits and there's Suspended Animation. And we had Suspended Animation, which didn't have any of the singles on it, right? But it's a great. The cool thing about that, we don't do any Monks, because that's got like Drugs in My Pocket and Bad Habits are on that album.
Yeah.
The thing about Suspended Animation was every song sounded like a different band.
Yeah. Every
song on that record, in one they sounded like the Knack, and then in another song they sounded like the Police, and then in another song they sounded so. And interesting, because that's a band that kind of disappeared from the collective consciousness, which is a shame.
Well, they didn't have any success. They have a bit more success in Canada than they did in England.
God, that's incredible. Because both those records I remember both those records got played a lot in our kind of cohort of people. So
absolutely. Well, I don't know if you've ever dug into the story, but the Monks were actually a very successful UK pop band called the Trogs.
Okay. The Trogs, yeah.
The Trogs. And the Trogs decided to do something a little different outside of the pop world. And they created these songs for the Bad Habits record. And they couldn't get it released in England, so they had to go through a French label.
Okay. And
there's stories that the band wasn't even called the Monks. It was called something else, but it got lost in translation when going from English to the French press, and it came out.
Right.
So there's a whole story behind that. But apparently the people in England were like, well, no, this is a pop band. We're not going to buy this shit like this. Like they knew. they
Oh
fell
no.
right through it. So they never had
They were
success over there.
they were weirdly subversive albums because they were funny. I mean, you've got like a sexy nun on the front, so there's
Yeah.
that raises eyebrows. But I mean, there's songs like Skylab.
Oh, I know.
Just the guy saying Skylab.
It's wacky. And just, yeah, I know. And they say it's a theme song from the Monks. So I don't know if there's a story behind that too either. The whole thing, I mean, I love it. It's a lot of fun, but it seems really, really sort of really concocted, you know.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of it too. That's the beauty of it too. What else did I have
This
here?
is so much. This is so much fun, man.
Thanks. I'm having a blast too. Now I know this is a tough one because it's a female singer, but
Yeah.
so
Brass and Pockets, just such a great song, right?
Yeah.
It's just such a great song. And who was the guitarist? Was it Honeyman Scott?
yeah, James
Yeah.
Scott. Look at you go, eh? Right
No,
on.
well, because I mean, he was a huge influence. If he's the guitarist for that band always gets, and then unfortunately he passed away really young. He died really young. He gets cited by the next generation of great British guitarists, like Johnny Marr and those kinds of guys, because he had that kind of beautiful, clean, I don't want to call it jangly sound, but you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah.
Super. It was kind of super rhythmic, but had a lead feel as well.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like I remember when that record came out, that Brass and Pocket was on all the time. And the other cool thing about growing up in Newfoundland too is you had NTV, which was if you're not from Newfoundland, you might not know as much, but that's it was the CTV affiliate in Newfoundland, but it was more than that. It was kind of like Newfoundland's broadcaster, and they used to play videos before anybody else played videos.
Yeah.
So I can remember seeing the video for that maybe what is that from 1980 or 81? That record.
Brass and Pocket is 79.
79. So
yeah.
we would have been watching those videos like in 1980, kind of before videos really blew up. But I just remember that album. That was a great record.